Eleanor Matthews sat at her kitchen table, stirring her morning coffee as sunlight streamed through the curtains. At 62, she had weathered many storms in life, but nothing prepared her for the phone call she received 6 months ago. "Mom, I met someone. She's amazing. Her name is Vanessa." Eleanor smiled at the memory of her son's excitement. Michael had always been cautious with relationships. At 35, he had focused on building his engineering career rather than settling down. His sudden enthusiasm for this new woman had surprised her. The surprise turned to shock when, just 2 months later, Michael called again. "We're getting married, Mom. I proposed last night." And she said yes. Eleanor felt her stomach tighten as she replayed that conversation. Something hadn't felt right, but she couldn't explain what. She had raised Michael alone after his father died when he was just 10. They shared a special bond that had guided them through difficult times. Her intuition rarely failed her. The first time Eleanor met Vanessa was at a restaurant downtown. The young woman was beautiful, with long dark hair and a dazzling smile. She spoke confidently about her work in pharmaceutical sales and her travels around the world. Michael looked at her with complete adoration. "She's perfect, isn't she?" he had whispered to Eleanor while Vanessa was in the restroom. Eleanor had nodded and smiled, but a small voice inside her head disagreed. There was something calculated about the way Vanessa spoke, something rehearsed in her stories. Over the next few months, wedding plans moved at lightning speed. Vanessa pushed for an expensive venue and a large guest list, despite Michael's modest savings. When Eleanor gently suggested they consider a smaller ceremony, Vanessa's smile had turned cold. "Michael deserves the best day possible. Don't you want that for your son?" The question left Eleanor feeling like the villain. After that, she kept her concerns to herself. As the wedding day approached, Eleanor noticed more troubling signs. Whenever family history came up, Vanessa quickly changed the subject. She had no family attending the wedding. Apparently, they had all passed away or lived abroad. She received phone calls that made her step outside to answer. Most concerning was how she seemed to isolate Michael from his old friends. "They just don't understand our connection," Vanessa had explained when Michael mentioned his friends hadn't seen him in months. 1 week before the wedding, Eleanor visited Michael's apartment to help with final preparations. Vanessa was out at a dress fitting, and Eleanor noticed how many expensive new items filled the space: designer clothes, jewelry, and electronics. Michael's salary was good, but not that good. "She has expensive taste," Michael admitted when Eleanor commented on the new television. "But she's worth every penny." Eleanor nodded silently, her worry growing. That night she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, haunted by the feeling that something was very wrong. Her son's happiness meant everything to her, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Tomorrow was the rehearsal dinner. Soon after would be the wedding. Eleanor stared at the ceiling, wondering if she should speak up or stay silent. Whatever choice she made, she knew lives would change forever. The mother's intuition that had guided her for decades was screaming now. Something about Vanessa wasn't right, and Eleanor feared her son was walking into danger with his eyes closed by love. The rehearsal dinner was held at an expensive restaurant downtown. Eleanor watched as Vanessa charmed everyone at the table, laughing at just the right moments and touching Michael's arm lovingly whenever he spoke. To anyone else, they looked like the perfect couple. "How did you two meet again?" asked Robert, Michael's childhood friend and best man. Michael smiled. "At that medical conference in Boston, I was presenting my engineering project, and Vanessa was there representing her pharmaceutical company." "It was love at first sight," Vanessa added, leaning her head on Michael's shoulder. "I knew he was the one when he couldn't stop stuttering through his presentation after we made eye contact." Everyone laughed, but Eleanor noticed something odd. Just 3 months ago, Vanessa had told a different story at their family dinner. She had claimed they met when Michael helped her with a flat tire. Eleanor frowned slightly but said nothing. As the evening continued, Eleanor observed how Vanessa skillfully directed conversations, especially when questions about her past came up. When Robert asked about her college years, she quickly mentioned a degree from Stanford before changing the subject to wedding details. "Stanford? That's impressive," Robert said. "What year did you graduate?" 2012, Vanessa answered quickly. "Now, about the seating arrangement for tomorrow." Eleanor made a mental note. Earlier that month, Vanessa had mentioned graduating in 2009. Small inconsistencies, but they added up. After dinner, Eleanor offered to drive Michael home since Vanessa had to meet early with the wedding planner the next morning. "She's wonderful, Mom," Michael said as they drove through the quiet streets. "I still can't believe she chose me." Eleanor glanced at her son. His face glowed with happiness, but there was something else there too, a nervousness she hadn't seen before. "Are you okay, Michael? You seem a bit anxious." Michael hesitated. "It's nothing. Just wedding jitters, I guess." "You can tell me anything, you know that," Eleanor said gently. After a long pause, Michael sighed. "Vanessa asked me to take out a loan yesterday for our honeymoon. She wants to go to the Maldives for 2 weeks." "A loan? But I thought you were saving for a house down payment." "We were, but Vanessa says we deserve a special honeymoon. The loan is only for $30,000. Eleanor gripped the steering wheel tighter. "That's a lot of money, Michael." "I know, but she's right. We only get married once." His voice sounded unsure, despite his confident words. When they arrived at his apartment, Eleanor noticed several shopping bags by the door. "More shopping?" she asked casually. Michael looked embarrassed. Vanessa needed some things for the wedding. Eleanor hugged her son goodnight, her heart heavy with worry. Back in her car, she sat for a long moment before starting the engine. The pieces didn't fit together. Vanessa claimed to have a successful career, yet Michael was taking out loans for her expensive tastes. On her drive home, Eleanor's phone rang. It was Lisa, her neighbor who worked at the local bank. "Eleanor, I shouldn't be telling you this, but as your friend, I'm concerned. Michael was at the bank today requesting a loan with his condo as collateral. Is everything okay?" Eleanor felt her blood run cold. The $30,000 loan had suddenly become much more serious. "Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you telling me." As she pulled into her driveway, Eleanor made a decision. Tomorrow was the wedding, but tonight, she needed to find answers. She opened her laptop and typed Vanessa Carter into the search bar. What she discovered over the next few hours would change everything. Eleanor hardly slept that night. The clock on her nightstand read 5:30 a.m. when she finally gave up trying. With a deep sigh, she walked to her home office and spread out the notes she had made during her late-night research. The search for Vanessa Carter had produced little useful information at first. According to Michael, Vanessa was 32 years old and had worked for a major pharmaceutical company for the past 7 years. But Eleanor could find no LinkedIn profile, no professional mentions, no social media accounts older than 1 year. "That's odd for someone in sales," Eleanor muttered to herself as she sipped her morning coffee. More troubling was what she had discovered when she searched Vanessa's phone number. It was registered to someone named Rachel Winters. When Eleanor searched that name along with pharmaceutical sales, she found nothing. The wedding was set for 2:00 p.m. Eleanor knew she needed more information before she could approach her son with her concerns. With trembling hands, she dialed the number of Dan Peterson, an old friend who worked as a private investigator. "Dan, I'm sorry to call so early, but I need your help. It's an emergency." 2 hours later, Eleanor met Dan at a quiet coffee shop across town. His expression was grim as he slid a folder across the table. "I pulled some strings, called in favors," he explained. "What I found isn't good, Eleanor." Inside the folder were printouts of court records from 3 different states. All named Rachel Winters as the defendant in fraud cases. All described similar patterns: a whirlwind romance, unexplained financial requests, and disappearance shortly after accessing joint accounts or taking out loans. "There's more," Dan said quietly. "I found these." He showed Eleanor his tablet. On the screen were photos of Rachel Winters, who looked remarkably like Vanessa, but with blonde hair instead of dark brown, standing with different men. Wedding photos, dated just a few years apart. Eleanor felt sick. She's done this before. "At least 3 times that I could find records for it," Dan confirmed. "She seems to target successful professionals, men with good credit and assets, but not so wealthy that they have financial managers watching every move." "Like my son," Eleanor whispered. "There's something else you should know." Dan hesitated. In the most recent case, when the husband confronted her about missing money, things got violent. She filed a restraining order claiming he attacked her, then emptied their accounts while he was dealing with the legal issues. Eleanor closed the folder, her decision made. The wedding is in 4 hours. I need to stop it. Be careful, Dan warned. People like this can be dangerous when cornered. Eleanor drove straight to Michael's apartment. She rehearsed what to say, how to present the evidence gently. Her son was stubborn, just like his father had been, and she knew he might not believe her at first. When she arrived, the apartment was empty. A note on the counter said Michael had gone to the venue early to help set up. Eleanor stood in the silent apartment, looking at the photos of the happy couple on the walls. In one picture, taken at their engagement party, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Vanessa wore a delicate bracelet on her left wrist. It partially covered something that looked like a tattoo. Eleanor leaned closer, squinting at the small mark. She pulled out her phone and opened the photos Dan had sent her. In one, Rachel Winters had her arm raised, revealing a small star tattoo on her left wrist in exactly the same spot. Eleanor's hands shook as she gathered the folder and headed for the door. The wedding venue was 20 minutes away. Time was running out. Eleanor arrived at the Willow Creek wedding venue just after noon. The historic mansion was buzzing with activity as workers arranged flowers and set up chairs for the ceremony. Her heart pounded as she parked her car in the nearly empty lot. "Mrs. Matthews, you're early," called out Sarah, the wedding planner, who was directing a team carrying a large flower arch. "Michael is in the groom's suite with his friends. Vanessa hasn't arrived yet." "Thank you, Sarah," Eleanor replied with a forced smile. She clutched her purse tightly, feeling the weight of the folder inside. The grand mansion had been divided into separate areas for the bride and groom to prepare. Eleanor made her way to the west wing where Michael would be getting ready. She needed to speak with him before Vanessa arrived. As she approached the door, she heard laughter. Her hand froze before knocking. How could she do this to her son on his wedding day? What if she was wrong? The doubt made her hesitate. "Mrs. Matthews?" A young woman's voice startled her. It was Lily, one of the bridesmaids. "Are you looking for Michael? He just went to check on something in the main hall." Eleanor thanked her and turned away, relieved for the momentary reprieve. She needed more evidence before confronting her son, something concrete that even Michael couldn't ignore. She wandered through the venue, past tables being set with fine china and crystal glasses. The wedding Vanessa had planned was extravagant, far beyond what Michael could comfortably afford. Every detail screamed expense. Eleanor found herself in a quiet hallway lined with photographs of previous weddings held at the venue. As she slowly walked past the smiling couples, a photograph near the end made her freeze in place. There, in a wedding photo dated just 3 years earlier, stood Vanessa. Her hair was blonde then, but her face was unmistakable. She stood beside a man Eleanor didn't recognize, both beaming at the camera. The small plaque beneath the photo read Carter and Rachel Winters. Carter and Rachel Winters, not Vanessa Carter. Eleanor felt her knees weaken. She quickly took out her phone and snapped a picture of the framed photograph. This was the proof she needed. "Mrs. Matthews?" The venue manager approached with a concerned look. "Can I help you with something?" "This photograph," Eleanor pointed with a trembling finger. "Who are these people?" The manager adjusted his glasses. "Oh, the Winters wedding. Beautiful ceremony. Sad how it ended, though." "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Well, I probably shouldn't gossip, but it was quite the talk around here. Mr. Winters reported his wife missing just 3 months after the wedding. Turned out she had emptied their accounts and disappeared. Police were involved and everything." Eleanor felt cold all over. "And you're sure this is Rachel Winters?" "Absolutely. I coordinated that wedding myself." He looked at Eleanor curiously. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," Eleanor managed to say. "Just thought she looked familiar." She hurried away, her mind racing. She needed to find Michael immediately. As she rounded the corner toward the main hall, she nearly collided with her son. "Mom, you're early," Michael said, giving her a quick hug. "Is everything okay? You look pale." Eleanor took a deep breath. "Michael, we need to talk. It's important." Michael checked his watch. "Can it wait? The photographer wants to get some pre-ceremony shots, and Vanessa will be here any minute." "No," Eleanor said firmly, gripping her son's arm. "We can't wait. Please, just give me 5 minutes." Something in her voice must have conveyed the urgency, because Michael's smile faded. He nodded slowly. Let's go to the library. It's private. As they walked down the hallway, Eleanor saw a car pull up outside. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of a woman in white stepping out. Vanessa had arrived. Time was running out. The library of Willow Creek Mansion was quiet and solemn, lined with leather-bound books and featuring a large marble fireplace. Michael closed the heavy wooden door behind them, muffling the sounds of wedding preparations outside. Mom, what's going on? You're scaring me, Michael said, loosening his bow tie slightly. Eleanor set her purse on a nearby table and took a deep breath. Michael, I need you to look at something before you go through with this wedding. She pulled out the folder Dan had given her and the photo she had just taken from the venue's wall. Her hands trembled as she laid them on the mahogany desk. What is all this? Michael's voice held a mix of confusion and growing anger. Vanessa isn't who she says she is, Eleanor said gently. Her real name is Rachel Winters. She's done this before, Michael. She marries men, takes their money, and disappears. Michael stared at his mother in disbelief. That's ridiculous. You've never supported this relationship. Is this your last attempt to ruin today? Please, just look, Eleanor begged, pushing forward the photograph from the venue's wall. Michael glanced at it and shook his head. This just looks like someone similar. Lots of people look alike, Mom. It's not just about looks, Eleanor insisted, opening the folder. These are court records. 3 different men in 3 different states have filed fraud charges against her. Each time, she used a different name. Each time, the pattern was the same. Michael picked up one of the documents, his face darkening as he read. This could be fate. How do I know you didn't just make all this up? Why would I do that? Michael, I love you. I only want to protect you. A knock on the door interrupted them. Sarah, the wedding planner, poked her head in. Michael, Vanessa is asking for you. She wants to break tradition and see you before the ceremony. Tell her I'll be there in a minute, Michael replied, his voice strained. When the door closed, Eleanor grabbed her son's hands. I know this is hard to hear, but please, before you go out there, look at one more thing. She showed him the pictures Dan had sent her of Rachel Winters with her previous husbands. In one clear shot, the small star tattoo on her left wrist was visible. Have you ever noticed a tattoo on Vanessa's wrist? A small star? Michael's expression changed. She does have a tattoo there. She told me she got it in college. When exactly did she tell you she graduated from Stanford? Was it 2009 or 2012? Because she's told both stories. Michael sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs. This can't be happening. The woman in these photos took over $150,000 from her last husband before disappearing. How much money have you already given her, Michael? The loans? The credit cards? Michael rubbed his face with his hands. Almost $80,000 for the wedding, the honeymoon, the shopping trips. She said her accounts were temporarily frozen due to identity theft. Eleanor felt a surge of both relief that Michael was finally listening and anger at what this woman had done to her son. The library door suddenly swung open. Vanessa stood there in her wedding gown, looking angelic in white lace. Her smile faded as she took in the scene before her. Michael slumped in a chair, Eleanor standing over him with papers spread across the desk. What's going on? Vanessa asked, her voice sweet, but her eyes sharp. Rachel, Eleanor said firmly, watching for a reaction. Vanessa's eye twitched slightly, but her smile remained. Who's Rachel? Michael, the guests are arriving. We need to get ready. Michael stood up slowly, something hardening in his expression. Vanessa, could you come here for a second? I need to ask you something. Vanessa hesitated, then glided into the room. Whatever this is, can't wait until after our perfect day. She reached for Michael's hand with her left arm. That's when they both saw it. The makeup on her wrist had smudged, revealing the edge of a small star tattoo. Vanessa quickly pulled her arm back, tugging at the bracelet to cover her wrist. Her eyes darted between Michael and Eleanor, the sweet smile on her face beginning to falter. What are you looking at? She asked, her voice higher than usual. Michael stepped forward. Your tattoo. The star on your wrist. Oh, that silly thing, Vanessa laughed, but the sound was hollow. I told you about it before. From my wild college days. At Stanford? Eleanor asked quietly. Class of 2009, or was it 2012? The color drained from Vanessa's face. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant chatter of arriving guests and the soft music beginning to play in the garden. Michael, Vanessa finally said, her voice now lower, more controlled. Your mother has never approved of me. Now she's trying to ruin our wedding day with ridiculous accusations. She moved toward Michael, reaching for his hands, but he stepped back. Is your name really Vanessa Carter? He asked. Of course it is. What kind of question? Then who is Rachel Winters? Michael pointed to the photograph on the desk. Vanessa froze when she saw the wedding picture from 3 years ago. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at Eleanor. Where did you get that? The sweet tone was completely gone now. It's hanging in the hallway, Eleanor explained. One of many beautiful weddings held at this venue, including yours. To Carter Winters. The transformation that came over Vanessa was remarkable. Her entire demeanor changed, as if a mask had been removed. She straightened her shoulders and let out a long, slow breath. Well, she said, her voice now flat and businesslike. This is unfortunate timing. Michael looked stunned. So it's true. All of it? Vanessa or Rachel shrugged. What exactly do you think you know? Eleanor stepped forward. We know about the men you've married and defrauded. We know about the restraining order you filed against your last husband when he discovered what you were doing. And what about the loans, Vanessa? Michael's voice cracked slightly. The credit cards in my name? Was any of this real? Rachel looked at Michael with something like pity. Parts of it were real. You're not a bad guy, Michael. Just financially convenient. Michael sat down heavily, as if his legs couldn't support him anymore. The guests, he said faintly. All those people out there. I'll handle it, Eleanor assured him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Rachel looked between them, calculating. This is just a misunderstanding. I can explain everything, Michael. We can still make this work. She took a step toward the door. I just need to get something from my bag. Then we can talk this through. Your bag with your real ID and the cash you've been setting aside? Eleanor asked. Or maybe the plane ticket Dan found you purchased for tomorrow morning? Rachel's face hardened. You had no right to investigate me. You had no right to steal from my son, Eleanor replied steadily. Rachel's hand moved to the bracelet on her wrist, twisting it nervously. For a moment, Eleanor wondered if she might become violent. The room felt charged with tension. Then, unexpectedly, Rachel laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. You know what? Keep the dress. Consider it a parting gift. She turned to Michael, who still sat slumped in the chair. You should thank your mother, Michael. Most men don't find out until after the honeymoon, when their accounts are empty. Without another word, she turned and walked out the door. Michael and Eleanor listened to her heels clicking rapidly down the hallway, growing fainter until they could no longer hear them. The silence in the library was deafening. Outside, the wedding music continued to play as guests found their seats, unaware that there would be no ceremony today. Eleanor knelt beside her son's chair and took his hands in hers. I'm so sorry, Michael. He looked up at her with tear-filled eyes. How am I going to tell everyone? The grand ballroom of Willow Creek Mansion fell silent as Michael stood before his assembled guests. 86 faces stared back at him, expressions ranging from confusion to concern. The chairs had been arranged in neat rows for the ceremony that should have started 20 minutes ago. White flowers adorned every surface, their sweet scent filling the air. Thank you all for coming today, Michael began, his voice surprisingly steady. Eleanor stood beside him, her hand resting supportively on his back. I have difficult news. There will be no wedding today. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Michael's boss, seated in the front row, exchanged worried glances with his wife. College friends whispered to each other, leaning forward in their chairs. Vanessa. Michael paused, correcting himself. The woman I knew as Vanessa is not who she claimed to be. She has left the venue and will not be returning. Murmurs swept through the room. Eleanor watched her son with pride as he maintained his composure, despite the humiliation he must have been feeling. I apologize for the inconvenience. Please feel free to stay and enjoy the food and drinks we provided. Consider it a gathering of friends instead of a wedding. As Michael stepped away from the front of the room, his best friend Robert immediately moved to his side. What happened? Where is she? It's a long story, Michael said quietly. Mom discovered she was not who she said she was. Across the room, Sarah, the wedding planner, was already directing the staff to transform the ceremony setup into a more casual arrangement. Tables were quickly set up where chairs had been, and the bar opened early. Eleanor watched as Michael was surrounded by his closest friends, their protective circle forming naturally around him. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to find Lisa, her neighbor from the bank. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. Was it because of what I told you about the loan? Eleanor nodded. That was the first clue. Thank you for saying something, Lisa. You helped prevent a disaster. Has anyone called the police? Lisa asked. Dan is handling that part, Eleanor replied, gesturing to her private investigator friend who was speaking quietly into his phone in the corner. She's done this before, and there are active warrants for her in other states. The next hour passed in a blur. Guests approached Michael with sympathy and support, rather than the awkward avoidance Eleanor had feared. Many shared their own stories of relationship difficulties or close calls, trying to normalize Michael's experience. You dodged a bullet, man, said Christopher, Michael's college roommate. Better to find out now than after she cleaned out your accounts. Michael managed a weak smile. That's what Mom keeps saying. By late afternoon, most guests had departed. The venue staff began the process of dismantling what should have been Michael and Venus's perfect day. Eleanor found her son sitting alone on a bench in the garden, staring at the flower arch where he should have said his vows. How are you holding up? She asked, sitting beside him. I feel like a fool, Michael admitted. All the signs were there. The inconsistent stories. The financial demands. How did I not see it? Love makes us blind sometimes, Eleanor said gently. You saw what you wanted to see. Michael looked at his mother, his eyes red but dry. How did you know? What made you suspicious enough to start digging? Eleanor thought for a moment. It was many small things, but mostly it was how she changed you. You stopped calling your friends. You were taking out loans you couldn't afford. The Michael I raised would never do those things unless someone was manipulating him. Michael leaned his head on his mother's shoulder, just as he had done as a child when he was upset. Dan says they probably won't catch her. She's likely already changed her appearance and name again. They might not catch her now, Eleanor agreed. But people like that make mistakes eventually. As the sun began to set over the mansion gardens, mother and son sat together in silence. The day had not turned out as planned, but Eleanor knew that sometimes disaster avoided was the greatest blessing of all. 6 months had passed since the wedding that never happened. Autumn leaves crunched under Eleanor's feet as she walked up the path to Michael's new apartment. He had sold his condo 3 months ago, wanting a fresh start in a place without memories of Vanessa. The financial damage had been significant but not devastating. With Dan's help, Michael had managed to cancel most of the loans that Vanessa had convinced him to take out. The credit card debt remained, but Michael had worked out a payment plan. A small price to pay for a life lesson, he had told Eleanor. Eleanor knocked on the door, balancing a homemade apple pie in her other hand. Today marked exactly half a year since that fateful day at Willow Creek Mansion. Michael opened the door with a smile that reached his eyes. Something Eleanor hadn't seen in the weeks following the wedding disaster. Mom, you're early, he said, giving her a warm hug and taking the pie. And you brought dessert. Perfect. The apartment was small but bright. New furniture, simple and practical, filled the space. No trace remained of Venus's expensive taste. Something smells wonderful, Eleanor commented, following her son to the kitchen. I'm trying the pasta recipe Dad used to make, Michael replied. No promises it'll taste the same. As Michael stirred the sauce, Eleanor noticed a folder on the kitchen counter. Court documents. Any news? She asked, gesturing toward the papers. Michael nodded. They caught her last week in Seattle. She was using the name Jennifer Parker this time, engaged to a software engineer. Is he okay? He is now. The police contacted him before she could do any real damage. Michael tapped the folder. They want me to testify at her trial. Apparently, I'm victim number 6. Will you do it? Michael was quiet for a moment, focused on the bubbling sauce. Yes, If it helps prevent victim number 7, I need to do it. The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Michael glanced at his watch and smiled. That must be Kate. I invited her to join us. I hope that's okay. Eleanor raised her eyebrows in surprise. Kate from your office? The one you mentioned last week? Michael nodded, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. We're just friends. She went through a tough divorce last year and understands what it's like to feel foolish about a relationship. Eleanor watched as her son went to answer the door. She heard warm greetings and a woman's gentle laugh. When Michael returned to the kitchen, he was accompanied by a woman about his age with kind eyes and a simple, genuine smile. Kate, this is my mother, Eleanor, Michael said. Mom, this is Kate Chen from the engineering department. It's so nice to meet you, Kate said, shaking Eleanor's hand. Michael talks about you all the time. He says you're the reason he's not bankrupt and married to a con artist. The three of them laughed, and the tension that had lingered over mother and son for months finally seemed to dissolve completely. Dinner was relaxed and enjoyable. Kate was nothing like Vanessa. She listened more than she spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in both Michael and Eleanor. There was no flash, no drama, just warm conversation and shared laughter. As they finished the apple pie, Kate insisted on helping with the dishes despite Michael's protests. Eleanor watched them working side by side in the small kitchen, their movements comfortable and natural together. Later, as Eleanor prepared to leave, Michael walked her to her car. I like her, Eleanor said simply. Michael smiled. Me too, but we're taking things very slowly. No proposals after 6 weeks this time. Good plan. Michael hugged his mother tightly. Thank you, Mom, for everything. For trusting your instincts that day. That's what mothers do, Eleanor replied. We protect our children, no matter how old they get. As she drove home under a sky filled with stars, Eleanor felt a deep sense of peace. The past 6 months had been difficult, but Michael was healing. He was wiser now, more cautious, but not bitter. And most importantly, he was free to find real happiness. Sometimes, Eleanor thought, the greatest gift a mother can give is the courage to speak an uncomfortable truth, even when it breaks her child's heart.